Hey folks, Aestus here, back with another Draw Steel video for you guys. This video will be the first in a series of videos I am making, which are an in-depth tactical analysis into each of the 9 base classes in Draw Steel's Heroes book. If you're more of a fan of my video game CRPG content, Draw Steel is a tactical tabletop RPG that is fantastic. I am obsessed with it. You would probably like playing this game if you like my CRPG content, and there really isn't a better time to get into it than right now at the beginning of this series I am making. Now, a little bit about what I intend for this series to be. It is not a tier list video series. I will not be ranking each of the classes against each other. Rather, I will be looking at each class and analyzing its abilities and giving my opinions on how it plays tactically and how you can build it to get the most out of the tactical role that you want from this class. It's also not exactly a build video, although you will definitely get some build advice. My main goal here is just to make learning the classes more digestible. If you're like me, I get a lot of value and I have a lot more fun in tactical games when I understand the system well and have a kind of system mastery. But actually learning the games can be quite a slog, especially in a game like this where learning them is mostly just reading rules. Reading rulebooks has valuable information, but it's not really fun to do. So the plan for these videos is that for each class, I'm going to read through all of the abilities and explain to you in a hopefully more fun and digestible way how to get the most out of your class, and that is the primary goal. That said, I am not aiming this for a beginner audience. I will be referencing certain terms like the slowed condition or heroic resource, a triggered action. I expect for you to understand the basics of how these things work. If you don't understand that, you can always ask me questions in the comments. You can look up the terms you don't understand in this Draw Steel Rules compendium, or I will be linking very helpful beginner's guide videos made by other YouTubers who are my friends. Those are linked in the description. Today we'll be covering the Censor, which is the Holy Warrior class in Draw Steel. It is a lot like Draw Steel's version of a D&D Paladin. This is a Holy Warrior that's trained in arms and armor so that they can smite the enemies of their church or creed. In summary, from a tactical perspective, I consider the Censor to be a frontline alternative to the Conduit, offering necessary reactive healing and cleansing, while actively locking down and grinding down single target priority enemies. In general, it's hard for the Censor to compete with the Conduit, which is one of the most powerful classes in the game in my opinion. We'll talk about that more when we get to the Conduit next video. But the Censor does fill the healing cleansing role well enough for most compositions and in a sufficiently different way to the Conduit for it to be tactically interesting. Build-wise, the most exploitable strategy I find is a build that centers around the class's starting 5-cost option Purifying Fire, and then you can combine that with holy damage proccing on Judgement. Team comps can also build around this by stacking fire damage, and really you just get as many instances as fire damage as possible, and combining these gives the Censor individually and the Censor's team a very strong damage strategy to build around for killing bosses and solos. At Echelon 3 and 4, Censors do get more tantalizing and exploitable options, but these occur late enough that I can't consider them primary draws of the class. In terms of subclasses, the Censor gives 3 sufficiently unique options. That said, I greatly prefer the Oracle. I think it's the most tactically interesting of the 3. With the Paragon being a close second and the Exorcist a distant third. We will talk about that in more detail as we go through the class. I just wanted to give you this summary in case you wanted to know my opinion without all of the blather. By the way, I also have linked in the description a spreadsheet. I'll show it to you. This spreadsheet right here, which I am using as my notes for this video, which goes through every class ability in the game and gives a ranking. If you want to know my opinions without listening to a very long video, you can just click on the spreadsheet and use it for reference. If you have any questions about my rankings, feel free to ask me in the comments. Alright, that's it for an intro. Let's dive into the in-depth analysis of the Censor. Really quick aside, did you know I'm also a game designer? For years, I've done design work mostly in the tabletop RPG space. Recently, I've been contracting with a new studio on their D&D 5e product, Enshrined. Enshrined is a mythic horror D&D supplement that actually drew on my own short story fiction writing as inspiration in its early days. And since then, the project has received impressive support on Kickstarter, and I'm returning to consult on design and contribute to a planned draw steel conversion. If you're interested, please ask me about Enshrined in the comments or check out the links I've included in the description. Supporting my partners and sponsors is a fantastic way to support me. All right, thanks for listening, guys. Let's dive back into the video. Okay, diving in at level 1 with the Censor's base stats. Censors are a might and presence based class, so these will be progressing to max as you go for free. In general, I find these to be pretty good defensive attributes to max out, especially might. I find a lot of monsters, both in the monsters book and also monsters that I tend to design, or your director would probably homebrew and design, tend to have a lot of might targeting abilities. There's really just no way to avoid it. So good defensive starting attributes. Great starting stamina. They have 21 starting stamina and gain 9 per level. This is a standard stamina progression for tanky classes. So for example, if we look at the Fury here, they will be getting 21 starting and 9 per level. But what's different about the Censor is they have 12 starting recoveries. The Fury and other tanky classes usually start with 10. Censors are the only class to get 12 starting recoveries, and this is incredible. Recoveries are very good on them for reasons that we're going to talk about in a bit, but just in general, this makes them a tankier base class than any other class in the game except for maybe Tactician, depending on what kits you pick for Tactician. Now we're going to make our way down to some of the first level features. Your order and your domains are kind of like your subclass. We're going to put those aside for now and begin by talking about Wrath. Wrath is the Censor's heroic resource, and like all heroic resources, you have a base 2 that you're going to get, or roughly 2 that you're going to get every round. There are Law HR classes and Chaos HR classes. The Law ones will get a flat 2 like the Censor, and the Chaos ones will roll a 1d3 at the beginning of their turns every round and get that many. So obviously a 1d3 averages a 2, so in theory these are equivalent. It's just one of them has a chance to spike, but also has a chance to kind of have an HR drought. To be frank, I consider the flat 2 for the Law HR classes to just be tactically better. Predictability is a tactical value on its own. It's always better to have something predictably happen than to, chaotically, unpredictably happen. So I'm already liking Wrath for the fact that it's a Law flat +2. And then we get, of course, the Censor's Riders. Every class in this game will have 2 what I call HR Riders, which are additional ways that you can make HR in your rounds. You want HR Riders that are reliable and within your control to trigger. This will allow you to control the rate at which you get your heroic resource. By the way, heroic resource is really good from a tactical perspective, but also just from a fun and enjoyment perspective. The game is more fun when you have more choices and more of your currency to buy awesome abilities. If we look at the Censor's Riders, they have 2. First, the first time each combat the creature judged by you deals damage to you, you gain 1 Wrath. We'll talk about Judgment in a bit. It's a very core ability. But all you really need to know is it's a bit like Hunter's Mark in D&D or Baldur's Gate 3, where as a bonus action or for draw, steal, and maneuver, you mark a target with this. And if a target marked by your Judgment deals damage to you, you gain 1 Wrath. The second rider is the first time each combat round that you deal damage to a creature judged by you, you gain 1 Wrath. Now this is a good way to talk about predictability and control in your HR Riders. Notice that the second one is completely within your control. Right, so if I jump on Roll20 here, we have a Censor. So the Censor is going to judge an enemy. We'll just mark it with this. And then I'm going to walk up and attack it with one of my abilities. Now I've dealt damage to this creature, which means, I get +1 HR. That is completely within my control. I do it on my turn. However, the first HR rider that it has is not within your control. This is something that the enemy or your director decides to do. So this monster could choose to attack me, in which case I would get Wrath, Or he can just choose to run away and attack a different creature, and then I don't get that 1+1 HR per round that I'm really counting on. All of this is to say that Wrath for the Censor is, as far as heroic resources go, I consider it slightly subpar. It is mostly in your control to get all of the Wrath that you need, but there is this one element which is technically outside your control. Now, some of you at this point might be screaming that while technically it's outside your control, practically speaking, it kind of is, because the whole point of this class is that they lock down enemies so that they can't move away, and if they can't move away, then they're forced to attack you. That is true, but you also have to spend Wrath to lock targets down that way, so you're spending Wrath to get Wrath. Overall, it's a net disadvantage for Wrath compared to other HR resources in the game. That's my opinion on that. Since both of the heroic resource generation riders have to do with being judged, let's move on to Judgement, which is the Censor's class maneuver. You'll see a lot of rules here, but in summary, what you do is you mark a target with this, like I did against this werewolf here. You use a maneuver and you mark it with Judgement. While it is marked in this way, every time it uses a main action within your line of effect, you can use a free triggered action, so it's completely for free from an action economy perspective, to deal holy damage equal to twice your presence score. So if we go back to roll 20, if this guy does end up attacking me with a Curse Bite, well, because he is judged and he used a main action, he will subtract 4 at echelon 1. You can see that is twice my presence score here. Effectively, what this means is you are putting an uncleansable damage over time effect on a single enemy, and over time, over a long fight, you will grind them down, dealing a lot of damage with this ability. It's also holy damage, which is very important for its synergy with Purifying Fire, a heroic ability we'll talk about later. This is the main effect that you get from Judgment, it's just this damage over time, and it is actually quite good. Over long fights, this is going to deal a lot of damage. Furthermore, whenever a creature judged by you is reduced to 0 stamina, that is killed, you can then use a free triggered action to move this ability to a new target. So you use this once with a maneuver at the beginning of a fight. If you want to change it to a different target, you have to respend with a maneuver. But otherwise, if you just focus down one target at a time, which is usually what you want to do, this only costs one maneuver at the beginning of a fight, and then you can transfer it for free. Then there are these additional effects that you can get, 4 in total, if you spend 1 Wrath. We'll go over them really quickly. First, when an adjacent creature judged by you starts to shift, which is a special kind of movement that avoids attacks of opportunity, you can make a melee free strike against them, and their speed becomes 0. So this is what prevents this target from moving away. If it moves away from adjacent to me, and I've spent that 1 Wrath, I will get to make a melee free strike, and if I do, his movement is reduced to 0, so he's not able to move away, and he's forced to attack me. This is one of the few ways of getting positional lockdown in Draw Steel. Draw Steel is a game where you don't get the ability to lock down a position by default, really. You actually have to build around it and have a class for it, and Censors are one of the best classes for doing this. I really value this ability quite highly. For 1 Wrath to get this, that's very good. The second feature, you can spend 1 Wrath to make a creature judged by you take a Bane on a roll. This is not worth the cost unless it's the second Bane. Banes are really good if you have 2 of them on a target, not so good if you have 1. So I would only use this situationally. Third, a creature judged by you within 10 squares, if they use an ability with a potency, you can reduce the potency by 1. Again, this is a reactive ability, but when it triggers, it's very important. You can reduce a potency and make an ability which otherwise would impose a crippling effect on an ally or yourself. You can make it not work at all, and that's extremely valuable. So this is a niche situation when this will occur, but it's very powerful when it does occur. Finally, if you damage a creature judged by you with a melee ability, the creature is taunted by you until the end of your next turn. So this is a persistent taunt that you can apply on a judged creature. for the cost of 1 Wrath. I do consider this worth it. That's the second ability, which keeps this target attacking you and generating your HR. So if you spend the Wrath on this and this, you can lock a target down, force them to attack you, and get that Wrath back through your rider, right? That's the way this plays. All of that is happening with your persistent damage over time, holy damage for the main Judgment effect. Now, there are also some Judgment order effects which are tied to your subclass, so we can discuss these subclasses now. Censors have 3 options in the base Heroes book. They are the Exorcist, the Oracle, and the Paragon. The Exorcist is a more crowd control variant of the Censor. They get a lot of subclass abilities which focus on applying conditions, especially the Frighten condition on an enemy, and then also rooting out hidden or invisible enemies. They can just prevent enemies from hiding, going invisible, stuff like that. So that is the Exorcist. The Oracle gets lots of abilities themed around seeing the future. In general, they are a more support-oriented version of the Censor, and like I said in my class summary overview, I do consider the Oracle to be the best option. Their abilities are very powerful and interesting. Finally, there is the Paragon, which I guess you could call the most DPS kind of Chad-oriented Censor. They get abilities which deal a lot of damage and push targets around and lead their team through example. They're still a support class, but they're a little more like brawler oriented than some of these others. So you can, as a rule of thumb, think of it as the crowd control variant, the support variant, and the kind of tanky damage dealer variant. That's, again, just a generalization, but it helps you conceptualize what these are. When it comes to Judgment, each of them adds an additional effect to your Judgment whenever you cast it. These effects are free. You don't need to spend Wrath on them. For the Exorcist, you can teleport a number of squares equal to twice your present score. So it'll be 4 at E1, Echelon 1, and going up to 6 at E2, then 8, and then finally 10. Teleport in general for the Censor is used as a gap closing ability. You got to get on that target to lock them down, and it's very good for that. There's an added kind of hidden effect to teleport, where teleport movement works as a cleanse for certain conditions. So for example, the prone condition, if you are prone when you teleport into standing, so it cleanses the prone without you having to make a saving throw or anything like that. There are other conditions as well. I think it's restrained gets cleansed with teleport. So yeah, this is primarily a gap closing ability, but also a slight selfish cleanse on yourself. That's how you should think about it. Overall, this is very good. Being able to teleport 4 squares and up on a maneuver, extremely valuable. That's great for the Exorcist. The Oracle just gets more holy damage. They deal holy damage equal to twice your present score to the judge creature. So effectively, this is applying an initial tick of the damage over time whenever you cast the ability. This might seem the weakest, but it becomes the strongest if you do a Purifying Fire build, which we'll talk about in a bit. Finally, there is the Paragon. The Paragon can vertically pull the judge creature a number of squares equal to twice your present score. So obviously this is a displacement, you're pulling them. It also works as a gap closer because you're probably going to pull them close to yourself. Finally, it works as a little bit of damage too because it is a vertical pull. So if we go to roll 20, if I'm the Paragon and I cast Judgment on this monster, I can pull them 4 spaces towards me. But then I can also, like if you switch this to represent the x-axis, you can also slant them upwards as you pull them 4 spaces towards you. And this will mean they will always fall 4 squares or more against most creatures. It's going to give you a little bit of fall damage on the pull. So this might seem like the best of both worlds, right? You're displacing a creature, you're gap closing on them, and you're dealing a little bit of damage. This is very strong, definitely excellent. But the fact that the damage you deal isn't holy damage, it's not quite as exploitable with Purifying Fire. The gist of it is all of these are good. All of these are excellent use of a maneuver, so you can actually spam Judgment every round just to get these effects, and that's awesome. Okay, next up is kits. I probably won't discuss kits for all classes, but I do want to point out some valuable kits for the Censor. So we go to our kits here. First, let's talk about Shining Armor. This might seem like a good default for the Censor, and you would be right. This is the kit that allows you to use a shield, wear heavy armor, just kind of be a shielded sword and board knight. Kits give you stats, and then they also give you signature abilities. I usually like to pick for the signature abilities, but the stats also matter. The signature ability for Shining Armor is going to give you a taunt, something you can kind of do anyway, so that isn't the main reason to pick this. The big reason is this right here, 12 stamina bonus. Staminas are very good on Censors because more stamina not only makes you more tanky, it also increases your recovery value. And as we see when we get to the Censor's triggered action, recovery value is very important for them. So Shining Armor is a decent option. However, I really do feel like Warrior Priest is the standout choice here. This is probably like 95% of the time the kit that you will want on your Censor. It's giving you 9 stamina, which is less than 12, but still a lot of stamina for a kit. It's giving you lots of bonuses that you will use, and then it's giving you this fantastic signature ability, which, among other things, deals holy damage, synergizing with Purifying Fire. It also marks a damage weakness, which is a really good team buff, just all around a very powerful kit. So these are the two kits I'm recommending. Warrior Priest definitely, Shining Armor if you really want to go for a healing variant of the Censor. And then you could also pick like a range kit, like say Rapid Fire, Ranger, Sniper, you get the idea. Because Censors don't get a lot of ranged options, and it is important to have ranged attack options. I probably should have talked about My Life for Yours before I got into the kit, because the context of this ability is important. My Life for Yours is the Censor's triggered action. It's really, really interesting. This is a range trigger for yourself or one ally. It goes off. It procs whenever the target starts their turn or takes damage. The effect is that you, the Censor, spend a recovery, and the target regains stamina equal to your recovery value. And then you can spend a Wrath to also cleanse an effect on the target. What this means is if you have an ally that's taken damage, you can use your triggered action to subtract your recovery value to heal them. And your recovery value is likely to be higher than theirs, and you also just have more recovery than theirs. So it's a pretty strong situational heal. There's also just kind of a meta tactical value that you get from My Life for Yours, where over the course of an adventuring day, it is pretty common for some members of your party to take a lot of damage and run out of recoveries before other members of your party. And so it can happen where one person really needs a respite, but then another person has like 6 recoveries left. And of course, they're going to take a respite to allow their teammate to be safe, but they're going to feel like they wasted those 6 recoveries. You are never in that situation as a Censor. Every recovery that you get, every respite will be put to use. It's just always going to happen. And that means recoveries are just worth more on you, and you can build to have the strongest recoveries possible. That's why with the kits, we were talking about having a high stamina. High stamina means a higher recovery value. There's also just a thing that My Life for Yours gives you, where it gives your teammates more potential healing per respite than they really should be able to have. It kind of jailbreaks their healing. And what this means is your teammates can make builds, like for example, a Fury. They can build around taking a lot of damage in order to deal a lot of damage. And there are builds like that can be quite effective, but they're gated by your recoveries and your recovery value. Of course, having a Censor just gives you more healing than that. It jailbreaks from that hard gate, and that's something really only this class offers. It is a big reason to pick a Censor. My Life for Yours is very strong. However, while My Life for Yours is very strong, it does have one weakness, which is that it is not spammable. You kind of want to have a spammable triggered action, that is, a triggered action that's likely to trigger every round, and that you can always get value out of in almost every situation. And the reason for that is just action economy. If you don't use your triggered action one round, that's a whole action slot you're not using and you're not getting any benefit out of. From a tactical perspective, that's a problem. My Life for Yours isn't spammable because, one, there might be rounds where your allies just don't need the healing, or you don't need the healing. And two, you can just run out of the limited resource, which is your recoveries, in which case you no longer have a triggered action to use. So for that reason, it is good to build your Censor to have other options for your triggered action slot. One of the easiest ways to do that is through your ancestry. So for example, we can go to the Devil Ancestry, a popular choice for Censors. They get this glowing eyes feature. This gives them a spammable triggered action, doesn't cost any heroic resource. It is very likely to trigger. It's whenever you take damage from a creature, which is something you want to happen anyways because of Wrath generation. When that happens, you deal 1d10 plus your level psychic damage. That's actually quite a bit of damage. So Glowing Eyes for 1 point is a great choice for Censors. Maybe a little more situational is a High Elf who can take Glamour of Terror. This is another triggered action feature. Whenever you take damage from a creature, you can make that creature frightened until the end of their next turn. It's a little more situational to use, but especially if you are playing a Exorcist Censor, they have certain abilities in the game that function around frightening your enemies and stacking the frightened condition on top of frightened condition. Glamour of Terror can be very good for an Exorcist. However, one of the problems with this strategy is that High Elf and Devil choices compete with other really good options. For example, the Human. Humans make great Censors because of staying power, which gives them 2 more recoveries. Very, very powerful because Censors will use every recovery they have, and they're already incentivized to increase their recovery value as much as possible. I'm really not sure which is the most powerful ancestry. There's so many good choices. Human, Devil, High Elf, even Hakons can make great Censors. So yeah, for that reason, you can also just pick triggered action heroic abilities. I will highlight those as we continue our analysis of the class. That's enough said for My Life for Yours. Let's move on now to the first level domain features. We'll just go over this one really quick. Domains function a little bit like a part of your subclass. You can pick a domain which kind of represents your church or creed, and they're going to give you various features. They'll give you a feature at level 1, but then also at other levels. If you look at the spreadsheet I have linked in the description, under domain features, I link to another spreadsheet where I give a detailed analysis of these. I do this because these features are shared by with the Conduit class as well. So we'll be referencing this in our next video when we look at the Conduit. But in this, I give a rough ranking of how I rate each of these abilities, and then you can see here in the total section which ones tend to be the best from a tactical perspective, and really the best option for the Censor is the Life Domain. The reason is the Life Domain gives a lot of healing boosts. These will boost your recovery value, and again, that's really strong on the Censor for all the reasons that we've already discussed. If we go back to the sheet here, there's other really good ones as well. War is quite strong, especially in the early game. It's also quite boring, though, is my experience with it. Storm is really fun and interesting. It gets Flight. It's really hard to get Flight on your classes, even though Flight is really, really strong as a feature. So yeah, don't overlook Storm. Sun can be quite good as well. Late game Trickery is really good. So ultimately, these are minor buffs. There is an optimization element. If you really want to be optimal, in my opinion, Life is the best way to go. But it's not that important. You could pick whichever one you like from a roleplay perspective. All right, that is the features, and that's the last of the level 1 Censor features until we get to their abilities, their signature abilities, and their heroic abilities that we pick at level 1. This is the really fun stuff. For signature abilities, you have 4 choices: Back Blasphemer, Every Step Death, Halt Miscreant, and Your Allies Cannot Save You. I'm not going to go over all 4 of these. Really, I think the best way is to highlight an approach to selecting signatures which goes for all classes. The point of a signature is it's the most efficient way for you to spend your main action without spending heroic resource. And that can be very important because sometimes you don't have any heroic resource to spend, or you're trying to save your heroic resource to use more and more powerful ultimate abilities. That means you really want your signature actions to be broadly useful. The method I've used for building my characters when it comes to signatures, because you get 2 of them, I always pick one that I feel is spammable, that is useful in, 80 to 90% of the turns that I take. You're always going to get some value out of it. And then that frees me up to pick a second signature, which is a more niche option. Something that can be really powerful in specific circumstances, but broadly speaking is less useful than your spammable option. The Censor gets 1 from their class and 1 from their kit. And we already talked about if you picked the Warrior Priest kit, you get Weakening Brand. If we go to roll 20 here, Weakening Brand, very spammable ability. It's getting you damage. It's holy damage, so it's synergizing with Purifying Fire. It is marking the target with a damage weakness that's buffing all of your team's damage if you focus the target. By the way, focusing a target, yeah, that's very important. It's very important in all tactical games. By the way, this damage weakness, you can even see that it synergizes with the Judgement ability, right, on the Censor, because it's going to be dealing damage over time, and that buffs this damage over time. So if you picked Warrior Priest, probably your Weakening Brand signature is your spammable bread and butter one, and you're free to pick something that's a little bit weird and niche, and for that I find Every Step Death to be the obvious choice. First of all, it's a ranged ability. I like that. I like to have at least 1 ranged signature if I can get it. It's dealing decent damage. It's psychic damage, so you're varying your damage types a little bit. And then it applies this condition where the next time that target willingly moves before the end of your next turn, they take 1 psychic damage for each square they move. You can do some really fun things with this where you force move a target, you teleport them, whatever you need to do to move them somewhere where they have to move to get back to you, and then applying this on them and adding potentially quite a bit of damage. I mean, if they're moving 10 spaces, that's 10 damage on a signature. Incredible. Now, you're not going to hit this situation every time, but you don't need to, right? You only need to use this at those really key moments. And for the rest of the time, just use Weakening Brand. So I do recommend Every Step Death. However, if you're looking for a more spammable option because you pick something more niche with your kit, Back Blasphemer and Your Allies Cannot Save You are both good choices. Both of these deal holy damage and push a target in an AoE. Back Blasphemer is probably the more optimal choice, but it's a minimal difference between them, so pick whichever one you think is best. Now, moving on to heroic abilities. These are the abilities that cost your heroic resource, which is Wrath for the Censor. First, your 3 cost. Again, I'm not going to talk about all of these. I'm just going to highlight the ones that I think are good tactical choices. The standout here is Repent. For 3 Wrath, it is a single target range 10 ability. It's going to deal holy damage, which is great. And then it is going to apply an intuition targeting dazed condition. Dazed, very good. It's probably the best base condition in the game. Being able to apply dazed on intuition weak enemies is something very efficient. It's a very efficient use of 3 Wrath. And it's situational, but it's a situation that's, it's going to come up, maybe not every combat, but still most combats. Yeah, and it's giving you a crowd control element to your character, which I think is important to have. There aren't a lot of really strong crowd control abilities on the Censor, so picking one that is so good for 3 Wrath is kind of an important choice. However, if that isn't what you want, I also think Driving Assault is very good. It's going to deal damage and push a target, plus giving you more movement to close the distance and lock down a position. For 3 Wrath, that's actually quite good. So these are the 2 I recommend, depending on the playstyle and the roleplay value you have in mind for your character. That is the 3 costs. Now onto the 5 costs. This is where we get to the ability that we've been alluding to this whole time, which is Purifying Fire Probably the most exploitable ability on the Censor at early levels. I rank this as an S tier ability. It's the kind of thing that affects your build. You want to build around this. So what does Purifying Fire do? Well, for 5 Wrath, it is a melee 1 or ranged 5 ability that targets 1 creature. You're going to deal some holy damage to them, and then Might targeting, apply a condition which gives them fire weakness, and it scales up from 3, 5, 7 depending on the tier in which you land it. Furthermore, while the target has this fire weakness, you can choose to have your abilities deal fire damage to the target instead of holy damage. So this is why I've been highlighting holy damage. Every time in the Censor's kit that you deal holy damage, if you're dealing it on a target that has Purifying Fire debuff on them, you get to swap it over to fire and increase the damage by this amount depending on the tier. So let's just think about this for a moment. Say I hit Purifying Fire, I manage to land it on this target. We'll use this symbol. And then I use Judgment. Now every time that they proc the Judgment damage, besides the 4 base damage, it's also going to deal an additional 3, 5, or 7, depending on the tier of the debuff I landed on them. At 7, that is 11 damage that deals to them for free on their turn. But then remember, I recommended we actually pick an Oracle, and Oracles deal an initial burst of damage on the cost. So if I start my turn by using Purifying Fire, I land it on the target, then I use my maneuver to judge them, I'm going to get a whole other tick and increase the damage that way. If they don't save it on further rounds, I have holy damage for things like Weakening Brand, for example, Repent. All of these deal holy damage, and they're giving you more procs of that damage weakness. Finally, if your teammates build around this and they have abilities that deal fire damage, they can also capitalize on that weakness. Altogether, this gives you a damage strategy for leaders and solos, which is so powerful. It kind of becomes your central way of dealing damage, and this is really the ability that you want to build your build around and your team comp around. Incredible. However, if you don't build around it, it's not going to be as good, because for one, it targets Might. Might is a very commonly high attribute, especially on bosses and solos and leaders and such. So landing it can be difficult. If you're building around Purifying Fire, try to encourage your teammates to build ways to give you surges so you can use those surges to boost the potency. Also, this is going to not deal as much damage if your teammates don't have ways of dealing fire damage on their own turns. So if you don't want to build around that, or your team just doesn't have buy-in to the concept, a good backup option is Censored. This is a very spammable, high value for 5 Wrath ability, where it does a little bit of damage, and then if the target is not a leader or a solo creature and is made winded, that is reduced to half health, they are just killed outright. Against especially elite style enemies, this is extremely high value for 5 Wrath. It's very evocative of what the Censor is supposed to be. You can't really go wrong picking Censored as a backup option if you don't want to build around Purifying Fire. Alright, that's it for level 1. Level 1s are always the most intensive. We'll go through the rest of the levels much more quickly now. All right, moving on to second level now. If I just pull up my spreadsheet here, you can see at second level, you're going to be getting order features. You're actually getting both of these. You don't have to choose between them. So you'll get 2 features depending on your subclass. And then you're also going to get a choice between 2 5 Wrath abilities depending on your subclass. So it's a very subclass dependent level. We are going to start with the second level order features. Like I said, you're getting both of these. One of them is a more combat oriented one, and one of them is a more out of combat oriented one. I'm going to be focusing on the tactical combat ones. Starting with It Was Foretold. This is the combat one that the Oracle gets, and it's really a standout in my opinion. This gives you the ability where at the start of an encounter, you can take one main action before any other creatures and before your first turn. If we go to roll 20 here, you can just see how good this is. Let's say this is the beginning of a fight. I am 10 squares away from the enemy, even if we lose initiative, I get to take a main action before everyone else. And here's where your build choices really matter. If you took Every Step Death as one of your signatures, you're really locked and loaded for It Was Foretold. The combination of Every Step and It Was Foretold is really, really good. The reason is Every Step Death is a solid ranged signature, right? So because you're just getting a main action, you're not generating heroic resource. So you probably don't have enough HR to use one of your heroic abilities. You're going to want to use a signature, right? You also don't have a movement. It's just a main action. So you want a ranged main action that can target an enemy. Every Step Death offers that to you. It's going to deal damage, and then whenever he takes his turn and has to move towards me, he's going to take even more damage. Fantastic synergy between these abilities. Even if you didn't take Every Step Death or another ranged signature action, you can always downgrade a main action into a maneuver by casting Judgement. Or if you're completely out of range, you can downgrade your main action into a move action and just get closer to your enemy at the start of a combat encounter. There's always something that you can do with It Was Foretold, but if you specifically build around it, you can get really efficient main actions at the beginning of a fight. It's just a straight up injection into your action economy, and that is always incredible, really a standout feature. If we look at the other classes' features, for Exorcist, their main one is Saint's Vigilance. That is this. Any creature judged by you can't use the hide maneuver, which against creatures that hide, like Woad Elves, for example, this is very good. But most fights won't be against creatures that really exploit hide, so while it's powerful in the moment, it's very situational. Then there is the Paragon's main ability, Lead by Example. While you are adjacent to a creature, your allies gain the benefits of flanking against that creature. This means that you can flank targets without actually maneuvering around them. This is good, but getting into standard flank position isn't that difficult on a team comp that has a lot of mobility. So while you will get value out of Lead by Example every fight, it's pretty low value in my opinion. Overall, hopefully you can see why I really prefer It Was Foretold here. Anyways, that's enough for the order features. We'll move on now to the order abilities. You get a choice between two options depending on your subclass. We'll just highlight some of the interesting abilities here, starting with the Exorcist. The best Exorcist ability at this level, in my opinion, is It Is Justice You Fear. So this is a single target kind of magic ability, which is going to deal some damage, and also targeting presence, potentially apply the frighten condition. But then there's this added effect where if that target is already frightened, you instead deal psychic damage equal to twice your presence score, so adding even more damage to a pretty decent damage ability. This is the ability that I was talking about where you can stack it with the High Elf Glamour of Terror. Glamour of Terror gives you a spammable triggered action to apply Frightened. Then you can follow up with It Is Justice You Fear to actually do quite a bit of damage. Actually, I'm probably overselling the damage here. The extra damage is good, but there are better damage strategies in the game. Still, it is a pretty cool way to build your Exorcist Censor if that's how you want to go. Then we move down to the Oracle abilities. I'll actually talk about both of these because they're so interesting to me. First, Prescient Grace. This is a triggered action which can be good for censors because they don't have a normally spammable triggered action. You target yourself or an ally, but it triggers when an enemy within 10 squares starts their turn. And basically you get all of the value for My Life for Yours, plus you get to take your turn immediately before the triggering enemy. Now, there are a few features in the game that allow you to act outside of standard initiative order. For example, Tacticians get it with This Is What We Planned For. Shadows get it with Hesitation is Weakness. All of them are really good. This is one of the worst ones just in terms of heroic resource cost. It's 5 Wrath just for one person to move out of order. Still though, that is very valuable in the right circumstance. If you have a Tactician on your team, if you have a Shadow on your team, this might be redundant. In that case, don't pick it. Pick With My Blessing instead. But if you don't have them, it's still a decent source of moving out of turn order, which at the right moments can just decide a fight for you. With My Blessing is the second option, also really good. This targets yourself or one ally within range 10. It's a main action, and then that target can use a free triggered action to use a signature strike or heroic strike ability, and then that ability has a double edge, okay? Now, if they use a heroic ability, you reduce its cost by 3. So in the math, you spend 5 to give them 3, and that might sound like a net loss, but remember, they're also getting a double edge. Handing an ally more heroic resource to put them ahead of the HR curve can be really valuable sometimes. There's just some abilities in this game that it is essential that you use as quickly as possible. And With My Blessing allows you to use them, kind of jailbreaks them, right? Like it allows you to cheat and use them before you ever normally would. I value that really highly in the right moments. Now, one of the problems with both of these is because of how expensive they are, you can definitely use this at times when it's not the right moment, and you actually kind of get negative value out of them. So if you are insecure in your ability to judge what is the good tactical moment to use these abilities, then Oracle might not be the best choice. These might seem kind of intimidating. They're not the sort of easy, use it, spam it whenever you want kind of abilities that maybe more beginner players or less tactically minded players would want. So just keep that in mind. Moving on to the Paragon now, I really like its sentenced ability at this level. I think it's the better of the two. Basically, it's a melee ability, melee 1, and you're going to potentially apply the restrained condition, but then with this effect where you can still force move the restrained target. If you have other ways to move a target on your maneuver, like for example, just pushing them with knockback, you can restrain the target, push them. If they're a melee only target, then they're forced to waste their next turn or potentially even more turns because they're restrained in a place where they can't attack. So there's lots of cool things that you could do with Sentence. It's an interesting ability. All right, that brings us to third level, the last level of Echelon 1. If we pull up our spreadsheet here, you can see at third level, all censors, regardless of subclass, are going to get Look on My Work and Despair. This is going to buff their Judgment feature. And then they're going to get a choice of 1/7 Wrath ability. If you just glance at my scores here, all of these are amazing. So it's a big level for censors. All right, Look on My Work and Despair. I'm really not much of a Shelley fan, but I think everyone knows that Ozymandias absolutely slaps. In Draw Steel, what this ability does is it buffs your Judgment, so now you can spend 1 Wrath, and if the target has P average, they are frightened of you. Save ends. Additionally, whenever a creature judged by you is reduced to 0 stamina and you use Judgment as a free triggered action, if the new target has P less than strong, they are frightened of you. Save ends. So effectively, this is allowing you to spend 1 Wrath to apply Frightened on a target. It's normally spend 1 Wrath for presence average. However, if you just killed a target and you're reapplying Judgment after killing a judged target, then it's strong. But by the wording is a little ambiguous. It almost makes it sound like this more strong effect is actually for free, but I'm pretty sure that's incorrect. I think both of these cost 1 Wrath. Regardless of which you do, if the target is already frightened of you, they instead take holy damage equal to twice your presence score. Okay, so this is just like the level 2 Exorcist feature that we discussed. It's Justice You Fear. It had the same thing. You can see a kind of meta that's forming here that you can build around this. Applying Frighten to them and then stacking up all of these take holy damage frightened abilities. And Look on My Work and Despair is definitely a good one. In general, Frightened is a pretty strong condition to apply. For 1 cost to apply it at P strong, very good. So yeah, won't say no to that. Definitely an A tier ability in my book. And then you get to choose 1 7 Wrath ability, and all of these 7 Wraths are edicts. Edicts function pretty much like auras. All of them have 2 aura, and all of them are going to do damage over time, holy damage, depending on certain conditions that are triggered. They vary depending on the aura. You can't really go wrong with any of these. Just pick whichever one you feel like you or your team comp is most likely to be able to trigger. I do want to point out Edict of Stillness because I think there's a broken mechanic in this. My thanks to Exorcist for pointing this out. Edict of Stillness, the effect, so until the end of the encounter or until you are dying, whenever a target moves or is force moved out of the area that is to aura, they take holy damage equal to twice your presence score. If that target is judged by you and they move willingly, they take an extra 2d6 holy damage. Now, under normal circumstances, this would be the worst one because it's the one you are least likely to control, right? They have to willingly move out to take the 2d6 holy damage. However, if you have a very high damage slide, which is something you can get on the Censor late game, like you can get, I think, a 15 slide on a maneuver at level 10 with the Censor, absolutely incredible. What you can do with this is, actually, let's just go to Roll20 for me to show you this. So this is your aura for the Edict. If you apply the slide, you can slide them up and they're going to take damage because they've left the aura. But then you can slide them back in and then out and then in and then out and potentially proc that forced move out of the area multiple times, right? It just adds up so much damage. You can get really an incredible damage strategy out of this. And you can do it, and also your allies can do it, because the aura lasts until the end of the match. If you build your team comp around Edict of Stillness, you actually get broken damage that rolls over everything in the game. At least as far as I can tell. I haven't actually done this myself. I just started crunching the numbers and doing some math, and especially by late game, this becomes too powerful based on the math that I did. However, I think most directors would consider this an exploit, and I consider it an exploit. I would not allow it at my table. I would only give them one of these per instance of force movement. And if that's the case, Edict of Stillness probably isn't your best option. Any of the others are good, like I said. Edict of Perfect Order is really good. You put this on a judged creature, and each time that they use Malice, they're going to take holy damage equal to 3 times your presence score. A target judged by you takes an additional 2d6. This really adds up. Especially if you're fighting a solo monster, they're guaranteed going to be spending Malice, and this can just rush down a solo monster. This plus Judgment just will deal so much holy damage on solo monsters, so definitely it can be worth the 7 Wrath. Alright, if we move on now to 4th level. 4th level is the beginning of Echelon 2, and you're going to get all of the typical stuff that you gain at an echelon increase. So your might and presence scores are going to go up. You're going to get a perk, more skills. You're also going to get Wrath Beyond Wrath. This is your heroic resource increase. So the first time each combat round that you deal damage to a creature judged by you, you gain 2 Wrath instead of 1. So this is doubling the value of your second rider, and that's what we want, because the second rider is the one that we actually control, right? So overall, very good. And then you're going to get your 4th level domain features. We already talked about domain features. These are the things that you share with the conduit. So at 4th level, you get more. I have them all ranked here. If we just look at life domain, because it's the one I recommend you taking, you get Blessing of Life. Blessing of Life, whenever an ally within distance of your My Life or Yours ability regains stamina, they regain additional stamina equal to your present score. So this is not only boosting the value of My Life or Yours, it's also boosting the value of all heals within range 10. Extremely strong. So remember, the Censor is a healing support class. Blessing for Life is just giving you so much more of that, and it stacks with all of your other bonuses, making you one of the best burst healers. Of course, there's always the conduit, but yeah, you get the idea. Blessing of Life, incredible. If you want to know what I think about the others of these, check out my domain feature spreadsheet and feel free to ask me questions in the comments. And really, that is it for 4th level. It's very impactful, but there's not a lot to talk about when it comes to the tactics of the game. So let's move on now to 5th level. All right, so pulling up our spreadsheet again, let's look over here at 5th level. We're going to get some order features, a different one for each of your subclasses, and then you're going to get a pick of your 9 Wrath abilities. Starting with the subclass order features, the Exorcist gets Evil Revealed. Automatically see through disguises and illusions created by creatures of your level or lower, and you gain an edge on tests made to see through disguises and illusions of more powerful creatures. This is mostly an out-of-combat ability, but it can be used situationally in combat if you're fighting creatures that use disguises and illusions. It's not likely to happen, in my opinion, but it definitely could occur. Oracles, they get Prophecy. This, if you've played a lot of Dungeons & Dragons 5e or Baldur's Gate 3, Prophecy is a lot like the Divination Specialist subclass of the Wizard. Basically, each time you earn one or more victories, you can make a number of rolls of 2 die 10 equal to the number of victories you've earned. Record each of the rolls. Then whenever a creature within 10 squares of you makes a power roll, you can use a free triggered action to replace that roll with one of your recorded rolls. So it's allowing you to see into the future and to see the results. The fact that this always works, like there's no potency, makes this one of the most powerful features in the game. It's extremely tactically valuable. You can guarantee tier 3 results on yourself. You can guarantee tier 1 results on enemies. If you roll a crit, you can just decide when you get to use that crit. Really, really powerful. And then the Paragons gain Stand Fast. At the start of each of your turns, you can spend 1d6 stamina to end one effect on you that is ended by a saving throw or that ends at the end of your turn. So at the cost of a little bit of stamina, you can end an end of turn effect at the beginning of your turn. It gives you a lot of cleansing. By the way, you can do it for allies as well. Overall, pretty good. Definitely something that you will use often, unlike Evil Revealed, which is very situational, but not even close to the value of Prophecy in my opinion. Moving on to the 9 Wrath abilities, you can choose between 4 of these. I'm not going to go over all of them. I just want to talk about the ones that I think are the most tactically interesting. First, Righteous Judgment. For 9 Wrath, you're going to be dealing a fair amount of damage. It's a melee 1 strike. And then, without a save until the end of the encounter, whenever an ally deals damage to a target judged by you, that ally gains 1 Surge. This is pretty solid Surge generation. Surges obviously add damage, but more importantly, you can use them to boost potencies, which can be very, very important. Notice this is whenever an ally deals damage, not yourself. So you can't actually benefit from these surges, which is unfortunate because Censors really want surges for Purifying Fire, right? But you'll need to get that in a different way in your team composition. Alternatively, you can take Shield of the Righteous. This is the kind of ability which you'll always get value out of. It's melee 1, it's dealing damage, and then you and each ally adjacent to you are going to gain temporary stamina equal to 10, 15, or 20. If you cluster all together and everyone's adjacent, this is giving you so much temporary stamina, especially if you guarantee a tier 3 result, like perhaps through Prophecy or some other way to guarantee a tier 3 result. This increases the durability of your party by so much and really just solidifies the Censor as a kind of reactive healing support tank, right? So yeah, both of these are good. You can't really go wrong with either of them. If you have other ways of generating surges, this might be redundant. Shield of Righteousness is unlikely to ever be redundant. And that is it for level 5. Now we'll move on to level 6. Pull up our spreadsheet here. So at 6th level, all Censors are going to get Implement of Wrath, a very good ability. We'll talk about that. And then they're going to get a pick of another 9 cost ability between 2 choices depending on their subclass. So Implement of Wrath, what does this do? Each time you finish a respite, you can choose one hero's weapon, including your own, to channel supernatural power as an implement of your god's wrath. The weapon becomes magic and gains the following benefits until your next respite. So it gains all of these, by the way, not just you choose. First, strikes with the weapon deal extra holy damage equal to the wielder's highest characteristic score. At this level, that would be +3, and it's holy damage, right? So this stacks with Purifying Fire. Any creature struck by the weapon who has holy weakness or has presence less than strong is frightened and weakened. Save ends. Another source of the frightened condition. This is a little more niche because it's holy weakness, not fire weakness, so you cannot force it with Purifying Fire, but you get the idea. Any minion targeted by a strike using the weapon dies. that minion stamina maximum is removed from the minion stamina pool before any damage is applied to the rest of the squad. So if you land a strike on a minion squad, one minion just automatically dies, then you deal the damage through. So it's always dealing one minion's worth of health added damage when you attack a minion. This makes you a minion killing machine, whoever has this. Incredible. And then finally, the weapons wielder can't be made frightened. Overall, this is good on you. I think it's technically even better on a teammate. And what's really important to realize with this, all of this is for free. Right? It's action economy free because you're not casting it in the fight. You just get it after a respite. It's heroic resource free. You're not spending heroic resource on this. It's opportunity cost free because you're not picking this instead of something else. Everyone just gets this. It's pure upside, and what it gives you is so good. What an incredible feature. This could be an S tier feature, except that none of these things that it gives you are really worth building around, in my opinion. Still amazing. Implement to Wrath, wow. 10 out of 10 for me. Now, if we move on to the heroic abilities, you get to pick a 9 Wrath depending on your subclasses. All of the subclasses have at least one really good 9 Wrath at this level, which is awesome. The Exorcist actually gets 2 very good choices, Begone and Pain of Your Own Making. Begone is a 3 burst, so it's AoE. It's going to deal psychic damage in the AoE and then slide all of those targets. An AoE damage plus slide's giving you more damage. This is really strong AoE ability, actually. So yeah, can't go wrong with that choice. You could definitely use this in pretty much every encounter. However, they also get Pain of Your Own Making, which is a free triggered action. It triggers whenever the target, that is self or one ally, gains a condition or effect that is ended by a saving throw or that ends at the end of their turn. That effect ends on the target and is applied to the creature who imposed the effect on them. This is really, really cool. Basically, it uses a monster's weight against them, where the more debilitating of an effect that they can apply is you turn that around and apply that on them instead. By the way, the creature also takes damage equal to 3 times your presence score. I mean, that's fine. This is the big effect. I haven't gone through the monsters book and done a full audit with this in mind, but I know there are some monsters that have pretty debilitating effects. I also like to rank these abilities with homebrew monsters in mind, because I think when a director can homebrew a monster, that is interacting with the game, the way it's supposed to be played. And so it could be that your director has homebrewed monsters with really debilitating effects. This is the kind of ability where you can just get creative with it. I love it. I would take this every time. Moving on to the Oracle. The Oracle also gets 2 really strong abilities. I have to talk about them both. First, Burden of Evil. This is a range 10. It targets up to 3 enemies, and it's going to slide them, and then also Intuition targeting Dazed. This is an AoE Dazed up to 3 enemies plus a slide. A great crowd control ability. So if you're lacking crowd control, this is a really good choice. Now, it does overlap with Repent, that 3-cost signature that we took at level 1. It's kind of like an AoE version of Repent. So you might think not as valuable if you're already able to apply Intuition Dazed. So that's something to keep in mind. They also get Edict of Peace. So this is another Edict. Edicts are like auras. The others had 2 aura. This one actually has 3 aura. And the effect is, until the end of the encounter, until you are dying, whenever any target takes a triggered action or a free triggered action, that action is negated and the target takes holy damage equal to your presence score. Now, this is going to be a controversial ranking. If I pull up my spreadsheet here, you can see I actually give Edict of Peace an S tier, and a lot of the people that I consulted on this really disagreed with me on this. The reason is that the monsters in the monster book tend not to have triggered actions or really powerful triggered actions. It's just not something the designers really design into their game so much. And with that in mind, Edict of Peace is actually quite bad, right? Because it costs 9 Wrath, and it's barely going to trigger. However, I feel that in principle, this is an extremely powerful ability because for the rest of the encounter, you are negating an entire piece of the action economy of your enemies. And if your director is like me and they're designing monsters that take a lot of free triggered actions, this is going to get insane value. Like, notice that there's no potency on this. It just always happens. You cast this and within 3 aura, all triggered actions are disabled. That seems really powerful to me in principle, but if you're playing in a game where you know your director is entirely or mostly going to be using monsters from the official monsters book, you're going to get severe diminishing returns for this. In that case, I would take Burden of Evil. So I have my own kind of niche reasons for thinking Edict of Peace is incredible, but for most games, Burden of Evil is probably a better choice. You've been warned. Moving on now to the Paragon. We're just going to talk about Congregation for the Paragon. This is a melee 1 strike. It's going to deal damage. Then, as a free triggered action, allies within 10 squares of the target can use a strike signature ability against the target. And it starts at tier 1, where just 1 ally. Tier 2, it's 1 ally. But by tier 3, it's 2 allies within 10 squares of the target can each use a signature strike, and that strike gains an edge against the target. Furthermore, there's an additional effect. Each ally can shift up to 2 squares and gains 2 surges before making the strike. So it's good surge generation. It's also just a lot of single target damage. If you've already applied a damage weakness on the target first in some way, then follow up with Congregation, then you get a ton of value out of this. If you have builds in your team comp that have really strong signature abilities, this is highly valuable. You get the idea. Overall, you can't go wrong with this, but it doesn't have the ceiling that some of these other abilities do. And that is it for level 6 and for second echelon. We'll be moving on to 7th level and 3rd echelon now. Okay, 7th level. This is the beginning, like I said, of echelon 3. And you're getting a lot of the normal echelon increase features, right? So your characteristic scores are going to increase. Nice. That's always good. You're going to get this focused wrath ability. If I can scroll down to it here. So Focus Wrath increases your heroic resource gain. You gain Wrath at the start of each turns. When you gain Wrath at the start of each turn, you are going to gain 3 Wrath instead of 2. Again, this is a straight up +1 Wrath. Consistently, always we're going to get it, so that's nice. You're going to gain more skills. And then besides that, if I pull over my spreadsheet here, you are going to get domain features. You can look at the domain feature reference sheet. This is the last level of domain features you get, and there are some really, really powerful ones at this level. This is really where your domain features start to shine. For now, let's just talk about Font of Grace, because that's what you get if you pick Life, which I recommend. Each time you use your My Life for Yours ability, you gain 1 Wrath that can be spent only on that ability during the same turn. If you don't use this Wrath, it is lost. Additionally, the target of My Life for Yours gains 10 temporary stamina. So not only is this another massive increase to the stamina recovery of My Life for Yours, it's also giving you effectively another Wrath Rider. Now you have to spend that Wrath on that same turn, but that's not that bad. An injection of +1 Wrath each time you use My Life for Yours, amazing. That's my recommendation for this level. Let's move on to 8th level. If we pull up the spreadsheet here, we can look at 8th level. Each order is going to get an order feature. I'm probably just going to skip over these because all of these are out of combat features. I can't really say anything tactically about them. So instead we'll just look at your choice of an 11 Wrath ability, and these are honestly kind of lackluster in my opinion. This is a weak level. 8th level is a weak level for the Censor. Okay, so 11 Wrath abilities. Which one of these should I look at? Okay, so some of these 11 Wrath abilities are good, it's just they're not good enough for 11 Wrath in my opinion. Let's look at Pillar of Holy Fire for an example. This is dealing damage. There's another I Weak Days, but just on a single target. So you probably have this in other parts of your build for cheaper than 11 Wrath. And the thing that's supposed to make this stand out is that at the end of each of your turns, a target dazed this way deals holy damage equal to twice your presence score to each enemy within 2 squares of them. It's just hard to control, right? Yeah, this is just hard to control. It's the start of each of your turns, so you can't push a target into it and then they start their turn and take damage. It's just a little weird. It's hard to really utilize this. Your ally's turn on you is an interesting one. Again, it's going to deal damage. It's going to be eye weak slowed. In principle, slowed is a worse condition than dazed. So for 11 Wrath, this isn't looking really good. The effect is, while the target is slowed this way, each of their allies who starts their turn within 5 squares of them must use a free maneuver to make a melee free strike against the target. Additionally, while the target is slowed this way, each of their allies within 5 squares of them who can make a triggered free strike against a different creature must make the free strike against the target instead. This is a little strange, but yeah, this is something you can control a little better. You push targets into range, and then when they start their turn, they have to use a free strike to attack the target. It's going to add up to a bit more damage, but for 11 Wrath, for how noodly this is to really get a lot of value out of it, I just can't really see myself using this that often. And really, this is the best ability that you get at this level. It's just not the strongest level, like I said. Let's move on now to 9th level. Okay, spreadsheet, 9th level. Here, we're going to get improved implement of Wrath. All censors get this, and then you're going to get more 11 Wrath features depending on your subclass. Some of these are really good. Exorcist gets good ones. Paragon gets a really incredible one. Apostate, we'll talk about that. Here's the weak part for the Oracle. This is the first level where I feel like the Oracle is kind of worse off than the other classes. And because 8th level was also weak, this is why if you're playing an Oracle, when you hit late game, 8th and 9th levels feel like dead levels to you, and that might feel bad. It's just the rest of your levels were so good leading up to this that it's still worth picking Oracle in my opinion. Okay, improved Implement of Wrath. So this is going to boost your Implement of Wrath feature, which we already talked about. The boosts that it gives you is each ally adjacent to the wielder of this weapon gets a +2 bonus to saving throws. That is difficult to control. You can use your turn to move adjacent to them, and then you make your ending saving throws with a +2 bonus, but +2 bonus just isn't a guaranteed to work, right? So you can do all of that work and still fail your saving throw, and that doesn't feel good, especially at this late in the game. Moreover, at the end of each of the weapon wielder's turns, each ally adjacent to the wielder makes a saving throw against each effect on them that is ended by a saving throw. So you, the wielder, can move adjacent to an ally and give them an extra saving throw. Again, it's nice, but they can still fail that saving throw. Finally, the weapons wielder has corruption immunity 10. Again, nice, but still a little bit situational. Compared to what you get in the basic Implement of Wrath, this is actually pretty weak, but it's still all upside, right? There's no opportunity cost. There's no heroic resource cost. There's no action economy cost. So we won't say no to this. Now moving on to the 11 Wrath abilities, we'll start with the Exorcists. They get 2 pretty powerful abilities. First off is Banish. This is a single target melee ability, which is going to deal damage, but also targeting present, potentially banish the creature. A banished creature just disappears from the map until they make a saving throw. So it's kind of like a hard stun. It cancels their turn, potentially multiple turns. It's on a single target, sure, but this is really powerful. For the effect, this ability gains an edge against demons, devils, undead, and creatures not native to your current world. If you know the target's true name, this ability has a double edge. While banished, the target is sent to another manifold in the timescape and removed from the encounter map. That's something I already said. A banished target can do nothing but make saving throws. And here's the cool part. They take 10 holy damage each time they make a saving throw. So it's always going to deal at least 10 holy damage on top of this. If the target is reduced to 0 stamina while banished, they are lost to the timescape. Okay, just a little bit of flavor text. So overall, very powerful. Definitely worth 11 Wrath in my opinion. Against a priority target, this puts them out of the map, deals actually quite a bit of damage, potentially a lot of damage if they're failing their saving throws. Incredible. It's hard not to pick that. However, it competes with Terror Manifest, which is also a good ability. This is a range 10 single target ability. It's a magic thing. It's going to deal psychic damage, presence, targeting, frightened, and then you get this effect. While frightened this way, if a target who is a leader or solo creature is winded, they take an extra 25 psychic damage. If a target frightened this way is not a leader or a solo creature and is winded, they are reduced to 0 stamina. So this is straight up killing targets that aren't leaders or solos, and against leaders or solos, 25 psychic damage. That's a lot. So yeah, this just really kills. This really kills targets. I don't know how else to say it. It's kind of like Censored, but more powerful for 11 Wrath. Yeah, it's really hard to choose between these. I think Banish is probably better. Yeah, it's really up to you. If we move on to the Oracle abilities, both of theirs are pretty bad. Here we get Blessing and a Curse. So this is a triggered action. If a target makes a power roll, it's one creature, could be ally or enemy. That target obtains either a tier 1 or a tier 3 outcome, your choice. And then you can choose another target within distance who attains the opposite outcome on their next power roll. So effectively you give an ally a tier 3 and an enemy a tier 1. For 11 Wrath, like this is good, but not for 11 Wrath in my opinion. And it's a straight up triggered action. Right, so you're using an action economy slot in this as well. Too expensive for what it gives you, in my opinion. Moving on to Fulfill Your Destiny. This is probably the better choice, but still not great. It's another triggered action. It targets one ally. When you or another hero ends their turn, target takes their turn after the triggering hero and immediately removes all conditions and negative effects on themselves. During their turn, the target has a double edge on all power rolls. So this is good, but it's 11 Wrath to get your ally moving out of initiative order, and it's a single ally moving out of initiative order, right? So if you think about this, a shadow gets this pretty much the same ability at level 1, and it costs them 1 heroic resource, not 11. It's just too expensive for what it gives you. So sadly, this is a weak level for the Oracle. Moving on now to the Paragon. Let's just talk about Apostate, because in my opinion, why pick anything else? I mean, Edict of Unyielding Resolve is good, but Apostate is incredible. So this is a melee 1 strike. It's going to deal a lot of damage, and it's holy damage. Then you get this effect. Until the end of the encounter or until you are dying, the target has damage weakness 10. So all instances of damage against it, doesn't matter if it's holy, doesn't matter. All of them are going to deal an additional 10 damage. This will melt through bosses, and there is no saving throw, right? Like there's no potency check here. It just always goes through. They cannot cleanse it. One of the strongest abilities in the game. This is so good. It makes me want to go Paragon instead of Oracle just to get this ability at 9th level. Absolutely incredible. Yeah, this is what makes Paragon attractive in my opinion. It just happens so late in the game. It feels to me it's hard to say it's a big appeal to the class, because how many people really make it to 9th level, right? And that is it for 9th level, and all that's left is level 10. Let's dive right in. All right, so you've made it to max level on a Censor. What do you get from this? If you don't know, 10th level counts as its own echelon, and there are features in every class in Draw Steel that allow you to keep playing the class past level 10. And yeah, it's pretty fun. There's some really cool things that you get. First off, your might and presence are going to increase just like every echelon. You get perks, you get skills. Then you get this ability called Templar. Whenever you use your Judgement ability, you can use a free triggered action to use a Conduit Domain effect associated with your chosen domain or a domain you access with Virtue. See below. We'll talk about Virtue in a second. If the effect calls for you to use your intuition score, you use your presence score instead. If the effect uses your conduit level, use your Censor level instead. Additionally, whenever you take a respite, you can open a portal to rest in the presence of your deity and bring along any allies. When you do, you can ask your deity 3 questions. This is a mostly out of combat thing. It's giving you a free rest plus some like information from your deity. So yeah, we'll skip all of this. This is the main tactical feature, and this is difficult to see how good it is because you have to go to the conduit. We'll do that now. And you got to look at the conduit's domain features. And you can see each of the domains for the conduit, they have a prayer effect. And that is what you get whenever you use your Judgment on a level 10 Censor. So let's look at life, for example. Here's the prayer effect for life. Choose yourself or one ally within 10 squares. That creature can spend a recovery, can end one effect on them that is ended by a saving throw, or that ends at the end of their turn, or they can stand up if they're prone. Alternatively, you or one ally within 10 squares gains temporary stamina equal to 2 times your intuition score. So at level 10 for a Censor, this would be 10 temporary stamina. So on a maneuver, you can hand somebody 10 temporary stamina. That is pretty good, right? Not insane, but still pretty decent. However, if we look at the other prayer effects that you get from some of these, you can really start to see how insane this is. So take, for example, the Trickery Domain. Trickery Domain prayer effect, you slide one creature within 10 squares of you up to a number of squares equal to 5 plus your conduit level. It would be Censor level for us. So that's a 15 square slide. That's the one I was talking to you about. And just think, you get this on a maneuver, right? So how hard is it to build so that your knockback gets 15 push? This is 15 slide on a maneuver on top of everything else that Judgment gives you. Insane value. Take a look at War Domain here. Choose up to 3 allies within 10 squares of you, or choose yourself instead of one ally. Each gains 2 surges, right? Each surge at this level is worth 5 extra damage. So 2 surges is 10 damage. You're giving that to 3 allies. That's 30 damage on a maneuver. 30 damage on a maneuver with 0 HR cost. You just get that. Not to mention, spending your surges on damage isn't even the most valuable thing to spend surges on. You can give this to yourself and use this to hit Purifying Fire and just deal tons of Purifying Fire damage. You get the idea. Just browse through these effects and go wild. It's so fun to think of doing this every round, HR free, on a maneuver. Absolutely insane. But I know what you're thinking, right? We picked the life domain, and that's what we've been looking at. And the life domain feature wasn't even that good. You can bypass all of that with another thing that you get at this level, which is Virtue. So Virtue is the mechanic that at level 10 replaces your XP. Because you're max level now, when you rest and you replace your victories for XP, there's no more XP that you need. You're maxed out. So instead of getting XP for your victories, you instead get Virtue. And you can use Virtue as like a bonus Wrath resource, or you can spend 3 Virtue to access one of your DoD's domains that you usually don't have access to. When you do, you can choose that domain's features until you finish another respite. So this allows you to pick a second domain, or if you're willing to spend 6 Virtue, a third domain. You get the idea. It's not gating you to one of these. So you can pick whatever domain features you want. So if we go back to the conduit and you look at Trickery or War, these insane domain features that you now want, you can get them with Virtue. And really, that's my recommendation. Trickery and War are 2 of the best choices. Storm and Sun are both really good, but you can just read through the list and pick whichever one you think is the coolest. And then finally, there is Wrath of the Gods. When you gain Wrath at the start of each of your turns, you gain 4 Wrath instead of 3. So this is increasing your passive Wrath gain even more. What's to say about this? It's just more Wrath. At this point, if you gain 4 Wrath every turn, and then you have 1 rider which you control, which is giving you an additional 2. That's a guaranteed 6 Wrath per turn. So just to give you an idea of how much you're really able to do. Yeah, 6 is quite a bit. And then if you trigger that 1 rider that you don't control, you're getting an additional +1. So you can max out, if you hit both riders, at 7 Wrath per turn. Very, very powerful. You're so powerful at 10th level, and it's really, really cool. 10th level for Censors is extremely rewarding. Anyways, guys, that is it for the Censor. Hopefully you've learned a lot. Hopefully you find this fun. If you have any questions, you can ask them in the comments. This video's gone on long enough, so I'll catch you next time.